The President's intention to reopen the closed box of climate change science has unleashed a firestorm of protests in politics before the project was even announced. The President is challenging the so-called science of man-made global warming and is referring to it as fake. How dare he, the politicians cry, this science is settled. The President's intention should be hailed. A review of climate science is long overdue, because too much has been swept under the rug, obscured by a swamp of errors, to the point that science itself has become choked by it, with numerous imposed obstructions of several different types that are converging from 4 different directions. The diversity requires a 4-part exploration, a 4-part series. In support of the President of the United States' announced intention to bring a flood of new light into the box of climate science, I would like to present a high-level overview of what is known as verifiable truths on the subject that takes us out of the grey fog of conflicting opinions. I am presenting in this video some basic facts that are often hidden for political objectives, but are critical for everyone's living on the earth. These facts reflect the result of numerous types of scientific physical measurements, not just 1 or 2, but many types of measurements that all tell us the same story, which is essentially one single story, a story of measured facts. Some of the measurements were conducted in space, some on the ground, some in the atmosphere, and some were also obtained with numerous types of visual observations. The video will address 7 of these often obscured facts. Fact 1. The Earth is in a terminal phase of global cooling that is increasing and has begun to affect agriculture, which is the main source of our food supply. My concern is that if we don't respond to the known facts of the ongoing global cooling, entire nations will vanish in 5 to 15 years as the result of agricultural collapse that can still be avoided, caused by the climate collapse. The fact is, we are nearing the end of agriculture as we have come to know it. Fact 2. Global warming. It did happen. We have enjoyed it for nearly 300 years. But it was not man-made. It was caused by the upramping of the sun. However, the warming is now history. It ended in the late 1990s. It will be fully reversed by the 2030s or 2040s. What we still enjoy of it is presently collapsing 5 times faster than it had originally developed. Fact 3. The doctrine of man-made global warming was not impelled by climate considerations, but by political objectives. The timing and the circumstances prove this rather well. Fact 4. The science of the sun and solar dynamics has been intentionally perverted to effectively inhibit human development. Fact 5. Atmospheric CO2 is not a danger, but is presently at a more than 600 million years low. The biosphere is CO2 starved. A massive CO2 increase is required to prevent a potential crisis. Fact 6. All the man-made carbon gases in the world added together are no bigger as a greenhouse factor than a mouse is in comparison with the historic World Trade Towers of New York. Nor is the greenhouse effect increasing. It is dangerously collapsing under solar cosmic ray effects. Fact 7. The political driver for the man-made global warming doctrine is a long train of philosophical errors that became amplified in the 1790s when the United States Constitution was erected, and became escalated ever since. Because the subject of climate change has 4 major facets, each of a different type, I have divided the exploration video into 4 segments and presented each one separately. The first segment deals with the great swamp of historic errors, which became overlaid with layers upon layers of modern errors, which altogether have shaped civilization and the policies of nations. The exploration of the swamp is important because the man-made global warming doctrine is a son of that swamp, as is the system of empire that champions the swamp. Both are features of it from their very beginning. Both are glaring errors in civilization that society has allowed to come upon it, and still bows to. Evidently, the swamp is large. The vast scene of latent errors and intentional errors from which the doctrine of man-made climate change is drawn is being focused on in segment 1. A small feature of this segment is the wide scene of the science opposition movements that have opposed the man-made global warming doctrine and still do. The scene comprises upwards to 50,000 individual scientists, where the real science consensus is located on this issue. Ironically, the vast opposition movement is itself stuck in its own swamp of errors, as it remains blinded against the principles that actually do cause climate change. While some opposition groups come closer to the mark than others, they all fail on the critical issue of what actually stands behind the climate dynamics. A few scientists go as far as to acknowledge that the Earth is getting noticeably colder, which is actually hard to avoid as the process is already far advanced. They even counter the media's crying about global overheating, with proven reports of ever more cold and ever more snow. But they still fail to discern the underlying cause. This failure is tragic, as they thereby fail to recognize the necessary responses by society to the climate cooling. In this scene, healing is needed. Being stuck in a swamp of errors is not the legitimate status of man. Freedom with the truth alone is legitimate. Segment 2 has a totally different focus. It deals with what is real, with what is really happening. It deals with the cooling of the earth and its effect on agriculture. Segment 2 deals with aspects that no one wants to hear about, namely that the climate on Earth is forced by the Sun, by way of solar cosmic ray interaction with the Earth's atmosphere, that increases cloudiness, which in turn cools the Earth. Society is taught that all cosmic rays are galactic and do not change, so that all change on Earth is man-made. The reality lies in the opposite. Our climate is affected almost exclusively by solar cosmic ray flux. Solar activity cycles are expressed as climate cycles by way of changing solar cosmic ray flux. I should add that the historically observed climate cycles are fast fading with the weakening solar dynamics. This means that our cooling climate is on a collapsing path from which a recovery is not possible anymore. Segment 3 has a different focus again. It is focused on resolving a paradox. People are scared of man-made carbon gases that are said to be overheating the Earth, but which isn't happening or ever can happen, while they are taught to close their eyes to the real danger that threatens their very existence, which they deny. This denial of reality is prevalent in numerous different ways. Society denies the carbon reality that is not only climate harmless, but is life-giving. Society also denies the climate dynamics that science has measured and has observed collapsing. It even denies the sun by defending the doctrine of a model that is physically impossible, which its historic timing suggests was created intentionally to be false, with the obvious consequences. Segment 3 counters these types of tenacious false concepts, including that of the sun, and presents what is actually real. Here in segment 3 is where the symbol for the video series is located. The symbol is the red square nebula. In the nebula, all the complex principles are visible in the large, which presently enable our Sun to operate in its high-powered interglacial mode, and to operate as a variable star with effects that cause large climate changes on Earth. The explicit feature of the nebula have all been experimentally replicated and explored in laboratory settings, and have thereby been proven in principle. Thus, the nebula illustrates in principle the dynamics that power our Sun. Segment 4 has again a different focus. It explores the principles required for humanity to have a future. Climate change means climate collapse. This means agriculture ends as we know it globally. The whole world is affected, but we have the power to create us a new world with a new platform for agriculture that is largely climate independent. Segment 4 explores on what basis humanity is able to shed its divisions and social and national isolation and join hands to build itself a technological new world for the realization of a common future. This is a critical subject in the current age as the end of agriculture is fast approaching. We face a complex paradox here. The climate is collapsing. The universe warns us. Mainstream science denies it. And society that is deeply affected is fast asleep. Shakespeare understood this type of paradox and gave it a face in his play Hamlet. He asks, in the context of the play, who speaks for humanity? In his play, no one does. In the play, society, the tragic fool, perishes. On today's stage, the question needs to be asked, who speaks for the building of a new world unaffected by climate, in which agriculture may continue artificially, unhindered by the natural end of agriculture in the world at large? In other words, who speaks for humanity? Physically, the task to create a new world that the climate collapse cannot affect appears overwhelmingly large. Physically, it is so large that no individual, tribe or nation can build the project alone. And that's where the problem begins. The core of the problem is that society has become conditioned not to see itself as one single humanity, but to see itself as divided, isolated, and poised against one another on a wide front, politically, socially, and also in the domain of science. In the face of the global climate collapse that no one is exempted from, it becomes critical for society to break out of its numerous traps in order to assure its future existence on this planet. While it is possible for society to achieve the necessary breakout from its traps, with the principle of universal love to embrace our common humanity, the track record of society on this critical front, where we must succeed without fail, is utterly dismal. Just look at how dismal our track record is in the arena of nuclear war all by itself. Humanity has built itself tens of thousands of nuclear bombs to threaten and exterminate one another with. This takes us as far away as one can get from being in love with our common humanity that we all share. If this contempt of humanity isn't the most dismal failure in civilization, what is? The failure doesn't render a nation great which wields these weapons of contempt, but renders it stupid. The size of a nation's nuclear arsenal is far from being a measure of greatness. It is a measure of its utter stupidity. Humanity is presently in a race with each other to determine which nation is the most stupid in the world. But this isn't the worst of it, because the man-made global warming doctrine falls into the same category of stupidity, except its effect is worse. While it is physically possible to destroy all nuclear weapons in a week, with which humanity would free itself of its terror, the solar global climate collapse that the man-made global warming doctrine hides cannot be so easily overcome. This is the context in which the doctrine needs to be seen. It needs to be set aside, and the real climate issue, the climate collapse, be addressed, which by its nature would affect itself also onto the lesser issue, the nuclear war issue, and obsolete it. The global climate is collapsing without a recovery in sight. The astrophysical processes are in motion relentlessly and are diminishing. We are in the boundary zone towards the astrophysical phase shift towards the next ice age in potentially the 2050s. This changes the global dynamics socially, politically, and economically. It is futile to run against this movement. Numerous measurements point in the direction of the Ice Age phase shift occurring in the 2050s, which the man-made global warming doctrine blocks the recognition of, and with it blocks the building of the technological new world that we need for us to have a future. This means that the man-made global warming doctrine must not be addressed as an academic issue, but must be addressed in the larger context of the boundary zone to the next ice age that we are already in. Nor should the climate change issue, as a doctrine is now called, be swept aside as being just weather, which hides the issue even more. It wasn't just weather that collapsed the Australian wheat production in 2018 by 40%. It was a systemic effect that caused this large loss. While the climate collapse is real and is evident in numerous physical measurements and is experienced worldwide in ever greater climate extremes and in food production losses, society is far from recognizing the already unfolding climate collapse to be actually real. People joke about it or brush it off as just weather patterns. Nobody dreams that the climate collapse that is still only faintly evident is a part of a larger long-term process towards the Ice Age phase shift that would terminate humanity's very existence if a new world was not created that assures the continuity of the agriculture that the world food supply depends on. This means that the greatest challenge for us to overcome is not the physical challenge of the climate collapse itself. We can respond to the physical challenge and will come out richer when we do so. The greater challenge, which is much harder to overcome, is society's universal smallness in thinking. Its smallness in thinking is a feature of society that resulted from it being tied to the vast swamp of latent errors that keep it tied to the ground. The swamp imposes on society its staunch denial of itself and of its power to fly above it. Fettered to the swamp of climate errors, society finds itself clinging tenaciously to crippling doctrines that it hails and defends on faith, such as the carbon warming doctrine and the impossible sun model doctrine, which are both intentionally false, instead of it unleashing its ability to fly above the swamp and gain higher-level views of reality. Hopefully, The following four-part exploration production will inspire some answers. The production is designed as a high-level overview of the four major focal points. My numerous related exploration videos that I have created on the wide subject of climate change furnish a resource for filling in the fine details. These videos are primarily focused on physical issues, scientific issues, and technological issues. The human relationship issues, in turn, require deeper explorations, such as to gain freedom from division, isolation, domination, and so on, ranging from the social to the international level. The point is that for as long as humanity remains divided, isolated, and choked with domination, the physical, scientific, and technological solutions that would assure humanity a future will remain unrealized. Nothing will be built to meet the needs of the future, near or far, for as long as humanity remains small and divided. The challenge to break out from this inner trap with an inner renaissance is the high-level focus of my 14 novels, on which 12 carry a single epic story focused on developing lateral relationships at a grassroots level on the elusive platform of the principle of universal love. The principle of universal love was the principle that was once faintly applied politically back in 1648 with the Peace of Westphalia, the greatest peace treaty by society with itself that had ended 100 years of clashes and war and destruction and had enabled Europe to live again. On this path, a new world may yet be built, and be built in our time, with all people of the world participating in the building of it for the fulfillment of the coming aims of mankind to have a bright and livable future in which to grow and develop forevermore. For this to happen, the principle of universal love may need to be projected deeper and uplift society from the grassroots level upwards, which would enable it to reclaim its politics from the swamp. Then war, even nuclear war, become obsolete on the higher level platform as a matter of principle. That this is not likely possible on any lesser basis is evident by the fact that war and nuclear terror are still being promoted. Millions of prayers have likely reached high heaven with hope for an end of the nuclear war terror game, but with no end in sight after 70 years of praying. The answer for this hoped-for liberation lies evidently in the climate collapse, for which society needs to dig deeper into its humanity, for which a new world needs to be built that becomes a challenge on the deeper level, where a phase shift in humanity must happen that rouses it to uplift itself to match the scope of the climate challenge that cannot be evaded, but must be won. War falls by the wayside on this deeper path, where the artificial isolation of humanity falls away. This is not pie in the sky stuff, as it might appear at first glance. Instead, it is the natural step in the progression of human civilization, which in the case at hand is prompted by the climate collapse event. It is as if the universe is saying to us all, you better get out of your easy chair, fly high, and gear up for a Renaissance wealth festival that you need in order to have a future, and which you are capable of. That's what President Kennedy had said in essence when he put the space program onto the national plate. He called on America to step out of its self-encumbering smallness and take hold of its inner potential that had laid largely dormant and underdeveloped for far too long. It evidently wasn't the case that we desperately needed to stand on the moon as a physical necessity for survival. The great need was for society to break out of its small-minded shell and become more fully human. America needed a wealth festival that typically flows from the type of process with which great projects are accomplished. America became richer by it as a nation, even economically. For every dollar America spent on the path to open itself a window to space, it created itself 14 times the amount spent in scientific and technological side benefits, and this in addition to the spiritual benefits of experiencing what a human being is capable of in stepping beyond assumed limits. The World Bridge Infrastructure project, with which we create us a new world to match the Ice Age challenge, should be seen in the same light. It should not be seen as a chore that is necessary for our common survival in the changing climate that is imposed on us. Instead, it should be seen as a natural step forward in the development of civilization that must never stall or go stale. Nor should it be seen as merely another Apollo-type project that had uplifted America in its time. It should be seen as a world project, a world development project that portends to unleash a world wealth festival with the power to furnish us 100-fold gain in benefits for society's investment in its efforts to develop its potential. Just imagine living on a radically higher level platform than we presently have. Imagine a world with universal high-quality free housing. It would end homelessness, poverty, slum living, rent slavery, and would replace these with expanded living conditions that are more productive for the inner development of the human potential, which is presently largely wasted in subhuman environments. Universal free housing as an investment by society into itself would all by itself spark a wealth festival revolution. In fact, the new world cannot be built on any lesser platform, like the monetarist platform that we presently have. To meet the climate collapse challenge that is already in the beginning stages, we need to produce 2 billion new homes afloat on the equatorial seas, with floating agriculture attached to nourish 6 billion people. And we need to have these in place and operational when the present world agriculture begins to break down, which may happen between 5 and 15 years from now. It is self-evident that the building of a vast project on a worldwide scale cannot be accomplished on the property-oriented basis of private monetarism and profiteering. The monetarist platform is an impotent platform. A phase shift is needed here towards a higher-level platform that does not yet exist. A more powerful platform is needed where the driver is not gold, property, privatization, and money estates, but is the human spirit. The principle of economics is to fulfill the obligations by society to meet its needs. When development projects are completed, the debt in obligations is extinguished. Humanist development credits are not a debt that society needs to repay to itself. Credits are ordered by society to make its world and itself more efficiently productive. When this is accomplished, the objective is met. The debt has been fulfilled. That's economics. Development credits must never be repaid. It would diminish the economic achievement. As a physical project, the giant project to build a new world across the equatorial seas doesn't pose much of a challenge. The new world can be constructed with modules made of basalt, produced in automated large-scale industrial processes, powered by high-temperature nuclear energy systems. Little human labor would be involved. Once the process is automated, the main labor would be to supervise the operation of the automated processes. Even the production of the industries that produce the infrastructures could be largely automated. Why should society waste itself on human labor? The greatest part of wealth that a society has is itself, which deserves the greatest care and devotion to develop it to the utmost, for it to shine. With this focus established in the heart and soul, the building of the world bridge infrastructure for a new world might actually yield 1,000-fold gain in beneficial results on the efforts to build it. And even the 1,000-fold gain in potential benefits would be still a gross underachievement in comparison with the standard of the universe. When the universe constructs an atom, for example, the result is 100,000 times larger than the sum of its parts. This means that we have a long way yet to go to match the 100,000-fold creative standard of the universe. Inversely, if the world bridge infrastructure would not be built, the loss incurred thereby would be infinite, because The loss incurred by the loss of civilization would be immeasurably great. That's the scope of what is at stake. Inversely, our reaching for a potential 1,000-fold gain from building the world bridge infrastructure appears to be fully realizable, even while the value of an uplifted civilization is not actually quantifiable. When the Ice Age phase shift occurs, potentially in the 2050s, with the world bridge infrastructure having been built, our present 7 billion world population would not diminish, but would continue to grow instead, both in numbers and in the power of its living, and also in its power to enrich the planet. This world-enriching aspect is critical. When humanity enters the new Ice Age in the 2050s as a highly developed industrial society, it would bring to the planet the technological capability to uplift the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere in large measures. The Earth's biosphere is presently severely CO2 starved. The CO2 concentration that is critical for all life is presently the lowest it has been for more than 500 million years. If this would be increased tenfold, the biosphere would be protected under Ice Age conditions and would not suffer the enormous losses that normally occur during glacial periods when large volumes of CO2 are absorbed in the colder waters of the oceans. In this context, the human response to the climate collapse would be of critical importance for all life on Earth. 50 times as much CO2 is dissolved in the oceans than is dispersed in the air. We can liberate some of that technologically to support the biosphere. Thus, our role as the most advanced and most creative species of life on Earth is of critical importance to life itself. We can accomplish some things technologically which the universe cannot and need our help with. We stand at a crossroads today with the potential capability that we have at hand to soften the impact of the next ice age on this planet. The capability has never existed before, but it exists now and may be more needed than we may know. Our response to today's climate change issue is that far-reaching. While society's present reaction to the climate change and to our ability to master it is a resounding "so what?" and society is more inclined to lay itself down to die, together with much of the biosphere. The option exists, nevertheless, for society to rouse itself and become more fully human, and thus to answer yes to the challenge and fulfill the role that we have developed us to play for the benefit of all life on Earth that promises to be greater than we yet imagine. Could the Stone Age people have ever imagined that humanity would achieve the capability to fly to the moon and to visit distant planets that appeared as but faint stars to them? Of course not. Thus we, today, like them, cannot fully recognize what wonders we may yet achieve far in the future with potentials unimaginable. With this in mind, we can say to the challenges of today, large as they may be, can they change the principle of civilization? Thus we face and master the challenge that we cannot avoid anyway, without us denying ourselves. With this potential on our side, why should we fail and not respond truthfully to the global cooling ice age challenge, and raise us out of the swamp of latent errors and be free? Why should we fail when such riches lay in our hand as we carry within by being human? To experience these riches from within and to experience them ever more fully is our native destiny and our joy. The 4 main videos of this exploration series might be seen as stepping stones towards the wider realization of our potential joy. My supporting work that stands behind the series is a resource that provides further details that you may wish to explore.
向前，激流勇进，在潮头之巅，看新天无惧间重现新世界的旅途，美丽又遥远，我们共开创风光无限。心愿，愿时光停留这瞬间，让圆圆的月亮托起我祝福，友谊的海洋宽阔无边，心心相印，像幸福彼岸，愿阳光漫漫海面，听蔚蓝色海潮澎湃我歌声，和平的航线永无终。